What if the greatest battle you face isn't against external challenges, but against the inner resistance that holds you back? Steven Pressfield's The War of Art reveals the powerful forces of resistance that hinder our creative pursuits and personal growth. This is the story of how I recognized, confronted, and overcame resistance to unlock my full potential. By diving into the principles of this transformative book, I learned to channel my energy, combat fear, and embrace the discipline needed to create meaningful work. Pressfield introduces resistance as a universal force that opposes our attempts to grow, create, and achieve. Resistance is invisible, insidious, and relentless, manifesting as procrastination, fear, self-doubt, and distraction. It is the silent adversary that stalls progress and keeps dreams unrealized. I saw resistance reflected in my own life. In the unfinished projects, the excuses I made, and the fear of failure that kept me from starting new endeavors. Recognizing this force was the first step. Pressfield's insight made it clear that resistance isn't personal. It's a natural part of any meaningful pursuit. Armed with this awareness, I began identifying the moments when resistance crept in. Whether it was avoiding a difficult task or doubting my abilities, I learned to see resistance for what it was, a test of my commitment. Each time resistance appeared, I reframed it as a signal that the work I was avoiding truly mattered. Pressfield's lesson taught me that resistance is a sign I'm on the right path. Pushing through it is where growth begins and where meaningful breakthroughs occur. One of the most transformative concepts in the war of art is the idea of turning pro. Pressfield argues that amateurs give in to resistance, while professionals show up daily, regardless of how they feel. A professional views their work as a priority, not a pastime. I decided to adopt this professional mindset. I committed to showing up for my creative work every day, treating it with the same discipline and respect as a job. This meant setting a schedule, creating a dedicated workspace, and prioritizing my craft over distractions. Turning pro also required making sacrifices, choosing my creative goals over fleeting pleasures like endless scrolling on my phone or binge-watching TV. At first, it was challenging. Resistance didn't disappear overnight. But the more I showed up, the stronger my resolve became. Each day I worked, I gained a deeper sense of purpose and satisfaction. Pressfield's concept of turning pro reminded me that success isn't about waiting for inspiration. It's about consistency and effort. By taking my work seriously and committing to it wholeheartedly, I began to see progress that once felt impossible. Every act of showing up became a victory over resistance. Pressfield explains that fear is a natural part of the creative process. In fact, the greater the fear, the more important the work is to us. Resistance often uses fear to keep us from stepping out of our comfort zones, convincing us that failure is inevitable or that our efforts are meaningless. I started reframing my fear as a compass, pointing me toward what mattered most. Instead of avoiding what scared me, I leaned into it. For example, sharing my writing with others once felt terrifying, but by pushing past the fear, I discovered valuable feedback and connections that improved my work. Each step into the unknown became an act of courage that built my confidence and expanded my creative horizons. Pressfield's insight reminded me that fear is not a sign of weakness but a sign of significance. Every time I confronted it, I grew stronger and more confident in my abilities. Fear became less of an obstacle and more of a guide, an indicator that I was moving toward work that truly mattered. By embracing fear rather than running from it, I turned it into fuel for growth and self-discovery. Procrastination is one of resistance's most common weapons. Pressfield describes it as a form of self-sabotage that delays our progress and keeps us from realizing our potential. Procrastination disguises itself as harmless distractions or justified delays, but it ultimately robs us of momentum and progress. To combat procrastination, I began breaking tasks into smaller, manageable steps. I set specific goals and deadlines, holding myself accountable to completing them. For example, instead of telling myself I'd write a chapter, I committed to writing for 30 minutes a day. These small wins built momentum, making it easier to keep going. I also recognized the power of starting. Often, the hardest part was taking the first step. Once I began, the work flowed more easily. I found that action itself dispelled the fog of procrastination. Pressfield's lesson taught me that progress is more important than perfection. By focusing on doing rather than overthinking, I learned to move forward despite resistance and to celebrate every small victory along the way. Pressfield writes about the muse as a source of inspiration that rewards discipline and dedication. He believes that when we show up consistently, we invite the muse to work with us, unlocking our creativity. The muse thrives on structure and commitment, not on fleeting bursts of motivation. I embraced this idea by creating rituals around my creative practice. Whether it was starting my day with a cup of coffee or setting aside a specific time for deep work, these routines signaled to my mind that it was time to focus. Over time, I noticed how inspiration seemed to visit more frequently when I honored my commitment to show up. This chapter reinforced the importance of trust, trusting the process, trusting the muse, and trusting myself. By creating space for creativity, I allowed ideas to flow more freely. Pressfield's lesson reminded me that inspiration is not something we wait for. It's something we earn through consistent effort. The muse, I realized, rewards those who show up prepared and ready to do the work. One of the most surprising truths Pressfield reveals is that resistance intensifies as we approach the finish line. The closer we get to completing a project, the more resistance tries to derail us. Doubts and distractions multiply as we near the point of completion. I experienced this firsthand with a personal project I had been working on for months. As I neared completion, doubts crept in. What if it's not good enough? What if no one cares? Pressfield's insights helped me recognize these thoughts as resistance's final attempt to hold me back. To push through, I focused on the joy of completion rather than the fear of judgment. I reminded myself that finishing was an achievement in itself, regardless of the outcome. By celebrating the act of completing rather than fixating on perfection, I found the courage to persevere. Pressfield's lesson taught me that the act of finishing is a victory over resistance, a testament to my perseverance and dedication. Pressfield argues that the opposite of resistance is love. Love for our craft, our goals, and our potential is what gives us the strength to overcome obstacles and keep moving forward. Love transforms our work from a burden into a gift, both to ourselves and to the world. I began reconnecting with the reasons I started my creative journey in the first place. By focusing on the joy and fulfillment my work brought me, I found renewed motivation. Resistance felt less intimidating when I reminded myself why the work mattered. Acts of love, whether pouring my heart into a project or sharing my work with others, became my greatest weapon against resistance. This chapter reminded me that passion and purpose are powerful allies against resistance. When we act out of love rather than fear, we find the courage to face challenges and pursue our dreams with conviction. Love became the anchor that kept me steady as I navigated the storms of doubt and difficulty. The war of art taught me that the battle against resistance is a lifelong journey, but it's one worth fighting. By recognizing resistance, turning pro, and acting out of love, I learned to overcome the obstacles that once held me back. Each act of creation became an act of defiance against the forces that sought to limit me. What battles are you facing in your own life? Remember, the war of art is not just about creating. It's about becoming the person you were meant to be. By showing up and fighting resistance every day, we unlock the potential within us and bring our truest selves into the world.